And yes, ladies and gentlemen, we all are settled and excited for the very special panel session that is upcoming right now. And to moderate the session, we have with us a very special guest. Without any further delay, and a huge round of applause, may I please invite Madhur Singh onto the dais. Madhur is a journalist and a climate communicator. She does not require any official introduction. We all are pretty familiar with her. And yes, Madhur, the stage is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Milan, for that very kind introduction. I think she's hyped me up a bit too much. It's a lot to live up to. I'm going to request the rest of the panel to please join me here. Rajan. For those of you who've been here since the morning, yeah, okay. Hi. So we've heard some of them speak in the morning, but just in case, I'm going to also introduce them. On my right is Matthew Pai. He's the author of Plato Tackles Climate Change. Come on, yes, please, we need a round of applause. Alister Stock, we've heard him speak in the morning about rewilding. He heads the Global Rewilding Initiative. And yes, please, come on. I know energy levels have flagged. It's the end of the evening, the final session of the evening. Rajan on my left is the author of Backstage Climate. I think, yeah, now that you know all of us a little bit, maybe we should get to know all of you a little bit too. How many of you are winners or nominees of the awards that are going to be announced tonight? Any nominees, winners? Wonderful. Great. Let's give them a big hand, please. I think for the final session of the evening, this is actually a very heartening session because all those who remain are probably climate optimists. Are we all climate optimists? Would we put ourselves in that category? Let's raise our hands. Yay to all of us. How many of us have organized, come together, joined hands to do something for climate change, towards climate action, for saving the environment? Yeah, I think that calls for a, let's pump our fist and give ourselves a yay, a big yay. Wonderful. And with that, I have to say I'm feeling extremely lucky to be with these wonderful people who are making our world a little bit better through all that they do and for what they stand for. I'm going to keep the session really simple. We've also been told that we only have 45 minutes as against the one that we thought we did. So we're going to start by talking about the importance and the potential of individual action for climate change and for conserving the environment. We're next going to talk about how it is that we can come together and organize because, frankly, the scale of the problem that we face is literally planetary, right? So how do we come together to have bigger impact than an individual can? And finally, if there's time, we'll talk about our favorite climate actions, climate solutions. So I think we'll begin from my right with Alister and take it clockwise. Okay, what do you think about the importance of individual action for climate change?
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me. It's been wonderful coming to Bengaluru for the first time. I will be back. Individual action is clearly extremely important. And I think it's amazing how individuals can make a difference. There is this beautiful quote that says that it is, we must never forget that it is individuals and small groups who change the world. And that has always been the case on all of the big social changes that we've seen. It is usually a few individuals getting passionate and wanting to make a change happen and getting together and getting organized. If you look at the history of slavery or most of the health movements, it always starts with small groups of people. It is rarely companies and it's rarely even governments that lead in making change happen. Governments tend to follow, social movements when they have the social consent to make the change happen. But I want to signal a couple of cautions. We as individuals are very constrained in how much change we can bring about through our own daily actions. If you think about what sociologists call structure and agency, our agency, say for example, you want to use public transport. You don't want to use a private car. Your agency, your ability to do that will be severely constrained by the ability of public transport infrastructure. So that's the structure piece of this. So I'm always a bit cautious about putting all of the emphasis for solving a huge, complicated thing like climate change on individuals. And actually we can watch the institutions in society and big corporations and so on, through their advertising, through their communications saying, oh, it's all down to you. It's all down to you as an individual. You know, you must think about your plastic bags and your this and your that. And meantime, you think, well, hang on a minute. You're investing billions of dollars a year. What are you doing to help us all do this? So I think we need to be a bit cautious about putting all of the emphasis on individuals. And this is where organizing comes in, is that individuals, yes, we can make a difference in our own lives by maybe eating a bit less meat or driving the car less or trying to buy greener products, converting to renewable energy, thinking about how we relate to the natural world. Yes, of course, all of these things are important. But I think the biggest way in which we can make a change is by working together to change the structures and to change the organizations and their policies. So for example, in the UK I was involved in, when I worked in the university sector, I thought to myself, what's the biggest change that I can make? And I realized I was a member of a university pension scheme, the third largest pension scheme in the UK, which at that time was worth about £30 billion. So I helped to set up a small campaign group to influence the pension scheme to adopt better policies for their investments. And we managed, I thought it was going to take ages, I thought it was going to take 7 years. We managed in 3 years, we managed to get them to adopt an active, socially responsible investment policy. And they now employ a team whose professional job is to do that stuff. And that set a precedent in the City of London, and now dozens of pension schemes have adopted similar policies. So just by thinking, like, how can we change the structures, that's, for me, one of the most effective things that I've done in my life. And that's a way that I think about how I as an individual can contribute to change.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much.
That's a beautiful answer, and all I can do is double down on what you've said with my own little details. I think in schools, because I'm a teacher, and if I take this perspective, 99% of schools, when they talk about climate education and climate action, in the session this morning, with the beautiful group of teachers that were there, I emphasized the fact that this is a narrative which has been given to us and paid for by British Petroleum. The individual carbon footprint is we've been hijacked in our consciousness about climate to just think on an individual level, precisely because it avoids the structural changes which are necessary. So as schools, we have to be brave enough, and as teachers, we have to be brave enough to point out and guide students into a more systemic map, both of the problem and of the solutions. So that's, of course, much more difficult. You have to, in a sense, disempower the students first to do that. But once you do that, you open up a whole new range of narratives and a whole new range of adjectives. And in a funny way, you give them agency. So, for example, if I just take one example of what you talked about with the pensions, one of my students from about 7 years ago, he had a desperate kind of climate anxiety. He just took a year out before going to university, so he'd been through my Climate Academy program, and then just hitchhiking, he happened to catch a lift with a law professor, and they were talking in the car. And 3 years later, this was a project which took the UK to court over its emissions. And that structural change, it became an organization, and that has been a huge block in terms of the UK emissions. So that's an example of having to, first of all, do everything in your individual life, like eat less meat, fly less, however it's possible, but at the same time always have a focus and an intention to change things which are, in a sense, bigger than you. And it's like a leap of faith. And if I just go back to what you said about how small things can change big things, the civil rights movement, I mean, who would have thought that that would have succeeded? Centuries of racial oppression, systemic abuse. And in the 1950s, that small group of people that actually in the end flipped America to sign the Civil Rights Act just 9 years after the first bus boycott, that was driven by just a tiny number of people, not more than 3%. And in fact, Erica Chenoweth, a Harvard professor of public policy, she identified that throughout the 20th century, if you look at all the major social revolutions which were peaceful, none of them ever required more than 3%, 3.5% of the people to engage in order to achieve this tipping point. So we're facing natural tipping points, but there are social tipping points. And if we just engage those people who are passionate, who get it, who can run with it, then you can achieve this kind of massive change. And just one last detail on that. The one thing that triggered the bus boycotts, you probably are aware of Rosa Parks, but if you just go back, you go Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and if you go back one more step, you find a little 12-year-old boy, and he's called Emmett Till. And Emmett Till was lynched. A racial attack, he was murdered by white men. His body was dumped in the river, in the Tallahassee River. And they found his body, and at his funeral, the mother refused to put the top on the coffin. She said, "The world has to see my son," because his face was beaten, his body was bloated by the water. It was a disgusting sight, but the mother insisted that this was not to be covered up. This is the reality of racial abuse in America. And because of that, it created this huge media surge, and that led, and if you ask Rosa Parks, why you sat on the bus, why you sat there, she said, Emmett Till. I couldn't stop thinking of Emmett Till. So sometimes, like in climate anxiety, you have to go to the end of the road. You have to be brave enough to eyeball how big the problem is. And if we just keep sort of trying to wash it away with small individual actions and kind of narratives which are like loose like that, that's not good enough. But we need both. And there's depth in them both, and as a society and humans, we can achieve these tipping points.
That's fascinating. 3.5%. It's an important number to remember. Where do you get that from, though? 3.5%?
3.5. It's Eric. If we had an hour, I could take you through the different qualifications to that number. But it's Erica Chenoweth, and she's a Harvard professor. So I mean,
she knows what she's talking about.
Good start.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rajan.
Thanks, Madhur. I think individual action is important, no doubt about it. But if you see any large-scale transformation that has been made in the world, always institutional intervention has been called for. So I think even climate change will need institutional intervention. But individuals have a lot of power. It needs to be channelized properly to bring in institutional intervention. The three tools that individuals have in their hands are their votes, their wallets, and their voice. And if we use these three effectively, we can bring around a change. If you look at votes, how many of us vote keeping the climate policies of the parties that are fighting elections in mind? Very few of us. So far our attention has been hijacked on very frivolous issues on which we go and vote, right? If we are serious about climate change, then let's make this an agenda. Let's see which all political parties have climate change in their manifesto, right? And vote for them. Ask them to put it in their manifesto and then monitor that, right? I think that's the biggest tool in our hands, in individual hands, and collectively we have that power, so we should use that. And that will bring around change in policy, and that will bring around actual change, because politicians are very smart. They will do what will win them the next elections. And if they know that climate is important for you, it's an issue that you are voting on, they will make sure that they do something about it, right? The second thing is our wallets. We vote every day through our wallets for companies, right? If we use it judiciously, let's use our wallets to vote for companies who are providing us green products, who are looking after the climate, who are not spoiling it, right? If you do that, companies which are environmentally conscious will be the winners, and the ones which are not will be the losers and ultimately die off. That's what we want to preserve climate. So let's work towards that. Every day, all of us make a choice. And if we keep that in mind when we're opening up our wallets, I think we will make a difference. The third is our voices, right? If we see something not happening, we should raise our voice. Many of us don't, me included, right? But if we start doing that, again, the powers that be will listen to us and will do something about it. So I would say the three things: our votes, our wallets, and our voices. If we use them effectively, nothing can stop the change.
So when we were talking earlier today, Rajan, you mentioned some of your favorite climate solutions, one of which was, am I clear? Are the mics working? Okay, yeah. Okay, can we turn the fans off? Because here we're not able to hear each other very well, actually. Maybe just these two fans? Okay, yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I was leaning in to listen to Matthew as well. Yeah, actually, sure. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, you can now? Okay. Yeah, I was just going to ask you to talk about your default settings idea. Oh no. Sorry, we don't want to do that. I think we'll just proceed.
You're actually part of a social experiment. By turning the fans off, there was a study done by an American psychologist, and he established that when the room temperature is hotter, people are much more receptive to climate. So.
Maybe this should be the default setting of all fans and air conditioners in India. Yeah, so Rajan, you mentioned something about default settings and how evangelizing eco-friendly default settings with companies can make a really big difference beyond what we normally think it can. So tell us more about that.
So I run a small foundation, and we were talking earlier in the day, and she asked me, what do we do? So I was trying to explain her, and that's what I'm going to explain to you as well. So, the world is focused on large initiatives for climate change, things like energy transition, industrial decarbonization, land use changes. And they are very good and very important because those initiatives will actually move the needle, those big initiatives we need. But what we felt is that there are some sub-mega initiatives which are going under the radar, right? Nobody is looking at them, but if collectively taken together, they can make a reasonable impact. So one such initiative that we were working on is called climate-friendly default product settings. If you look at any product that uses energy, your mobile phones, your printers, computers, your washing machine, TV, refrigerator, air conditioner, even the industrial machinery, all of them come with a menu of settings. And you have to adjust these settings before you start using them, right? And normally you would adjust these settings for local performance so that you get the best performance, or you start using them as it comes from the factory. Our hypothesis is that you can adjust these settings for climate friendliness without impacting local performance. I'll give you an example. If you take the case of desktop printers, 90% of the printers being manufactured today have the capability of printing on both sides of the paper. But globally, only 7% of the printouts taken are on two sides of the paper. Rest 93% are on one side. However, if we were to shift all the printouts to dual side, we will save approximately 30 million tons of carbon dioxide a year. That's a huge number, right? Similarly, once we give the print command and our printouts get over, we feel very happy thinking that the printer is now sitting idle, right, not consuming any power. But in reality, it is still consuming around 25% power. Now, because it goes into a standby mode, but there is another mode called the sleep mode. If you shift it to sleep mode, then it consumes only 3% or 4% power. Now, like this, there are 3-4 other settings in a printer itself which can save us energy or save us greenhouse gases. But you can't go to 1 billion users and tell them to change these settings. It will never happen, right? So what we are doing is we are reaching out to the manufacturers and convincing them to ship out their products with the settings that I just explained and more as default settings. Because then we believe that people will, many of them through inertia, will start using them as the product comes, right? But it gets a little more complicated because, for example, a printer, even if the printer manufacturer does the setting, it still won't work because the printers are governed by the operating system in the computer that you are connected the computers to. So we now need to work with the computer manufacturers or the operating system developers to make sure that the commands come accordingly. So like that, there are thousands of products and each product can be tweaked. So that's the research we are doing, getting into the depth of products, developing business cases, and then working with the industry and the ecosystem to make these changes happen. Does that?
Alister, what are some of the climate solutions that you think have most potential for impact?
Okay, so I think that's great. Just following on from your point about votes, I know that in some countries, I think in America, I think in Britain, there are NGOs that track the voting record of each politician, and they publish them on a web register, so that you can see the actual record of your potential politicians who are asking for your votes on the issues that matter to you. Now, if that information is not available in India, maybe that's a task for an NGO to do, or a small group of people who get up and they start doing the work to make that information available. So this is the example of taking a good idea and civil society developing in a way that becomes more sophisticated to enable your democracy to function in a better way that is more aligned with the sustainability of the future. So I'd say two things on this question of what we can do, positive solutions. The first is stop doing stupid things. And the biggest example that I have is stupid subsidies that our governments provide for industries with our tax money. Let us never forget that when governments do things, they are using money from us, taxpayers. And the three examples that I've got is governments are still providing huge subsidies to the oil industry. So they are kind of literally throwing fuel on the fire of the climate emergency by pushing our money to subsidize more oil infrastructure, more oil exploration, more gas pipes into homes. It's madness. So we, as civil society, and I know there's a lot of work going on in Europe and United States on this, should be pushing our governments to stop doing the stupid thing of subsidizing the oil industry, which is wrecking our planet. The second one is the fishing industry. The fishing industry globally gets a huge amount of subsidies, and it has recently been shown that bottom trawling, by destroying the ecosystems and by stirring up carbon, produces as much carbon emissions as the global aviation industry. Okay, so think about that next time you're eating fish. It's not all down to the individual, just want to emphasize that point. But this is another way in which we can get organized. It's to say to our governments, please stop subsidizing destructive fishing practices, spending our taxpayer money on this. And the third is that, there are two more. Industrial agriculture. Similarly, governments spend huge amounts of our money persuading farmers to adopt industrial agricultural processes using fertilizers, which, guess what, take a huge amount of energy to produce, and pesticides, and so on. And the fourth one is transport infrastructure. So everywhere I go in India, I see more highways being built. Now, on one level, fair enough. But on another level, are we spending as much on investing in mass rapid transport systems, trains and electrification, as we are on a private car? And this is a choice. This is a political choice. This is a choice that we are making as a society. So, and of course, when you build a road, you lock in people to using cars basically forevermore. So these are hugely consequential choices. And the last thing I would say is there are certain solutions in society for the climate emergency, and I call them system catalysts. And these are actions which address many problems at the same time. So we have systemic problems. We have a whole bunch of systemic drivers for the climate emergency, and therefore we need systemic solutions. And what are they? I would say three things. First is renewable energy. Renewable energy, when you install solar on your house, you not only get free energy from the sun, but you're also reducing air pollution. You're reducing the demand for oil. You're reducing the drivers that I've just described. So renewables, any form of investment in renewable energy, solar, wind, and batteries primarily, is a system catalyst that will be, it's probably the most radical act you can take at the moment. And if you can't invest in it in your own home, then try to find a supplier of electricity that is investing in renewables. Some are better than others. Choose the one that's better. It's to your point about the wallet. Secondly, electrify everything. So if we can electrify transport, if we can electrify cooking, if we can electrify manufacturing, electrify everything. Electricity is going to be cleaner. The exponential drop in the cost of renewables means that you will not regret any investment that you make in electrification. Electric everything is cleaner. Electric transport, next time you use a taxi, try to get an electric one. I'm going to try and get one to the airport tonight. And then thirdly, of course, I would say rewilding. Why do I say rewilding? Rewilding, we have really good evidence that shows that when we help nature's systems, nature's ecosystems to recover, it enables them to draw down huge amounts of carbon. So a reinstated forest, if you look at most of the forests out there, they have been emptied of all of the wild animals. So we'd no longer have the gore and all of the wild pigs and the wild cats and all of the creatures that would naturally be there. So it's this idea of empty forests. When we renew that ecosystem, when we help the whole ecosystem to become healthy again, not only do we draw down carbon and we address the biodiversity crisis, but renewed ecosystems clean our water, they clean the air, they prevent flooding, they stop the forests from burning. So my equivalent to the gore is the European bison, which I know eats 20 kilograms of dry matter every day. So when you bring back bison into the forest ecosystem, you're stripping a lot of the dry matter out of that ecosystem that burns. So when you look at a forest fire that's happening, that is not a natural event. That is happening because we no longer have the animals in there eating the dry matter that drives the forest fires. So forest fire, drought, flooding, all of these things can be addressed by helping nature recover.
Thank you, and I'd have loved to hear more about closing the carbon loop, but we'll do that later because we've run out of time. We've literally got 2 minutes now, Matthew.
That's fine. It's okay. And I can just agree about the default. And yeah, I'll come back to something you just said. So my solution, what I'm working on for myself is the infrastructure of the brain. As a teacher, you know, the word school literally means free space. And education literally means lead out. And schools are this very valuable last public space where it's not invaded or colonized by capitalist interests or things like that. So the schools are an incredibly important driver of change. And once you reset the paradigm of how people think, then behavior follows after. And I think just to focus in very quick, because I'm short of time, just 2 examples. I teach in a school which is quite prestigious. Lots of our students go to Oxford and Cambridge. It's a very well-educated place, blah, blah, blah. And I asked all of the 16-year-olds, so we have 300 16-year-olds, I asked all of them, do you know what a tipping point is? Only 1 person out of 300 knew that. So they're doing advanced physics, advanced mathematics. We are still pretty climate illiterate. And I think if we can change that, if we can get people to understand the grammar of the climate systems, we've not been doing that. We basically stop climate education at primary school level. And we don't advance them into complexity, we don't get them to do problem framing, or we don't get them to do critical thinking, etc., etc. And just one final example, even something as simple as 2 degrees. If you ask most people in the street, why is the Paris Agreement, what's this 2 degrees, why is that important? Most people can't really say why, but if you simply explain that the Earth is like a human body, and a 2-degree fever for you means you are essentially inactive, and a 4-degree fever for you means that you'll be dead in 24 hours, that's called hyperparexia, a doctor would call that, then suddenly that simple metaphor, and suddenly you understand this matters as a system. And then you can start talking about all these eco-biosystems as if they're organs in the body. And if you can just change how people understand and frame the problem, so it's not just about individual acts and recycling this and that, but if you can make it into a system level, and it's not complex, it's not difficult, you can do it, then you can really it's like a change in the default setting on people's behavior.
Thank you, and I'm sorry we've actually run out of time with this fascinating discussion. That's it, we can't take audience questions, but you can please catch all of them offline if you want. Shall I hand it back to you, Milan? Okay.
I request our panelists to kindly stay back for a group photograph.